So finally, some things about the man in the pinstripe suit and his powers were becoming clearer to me. A few things were starting to make sense, but there were still so many questions. Alice, I asked, leaning forward to speak to her. I think I get it now, why all the workers at your household end up hurting themselves. That's starting to become clear at least, but I still don't understand. Who is the pinstripe man? How does he do what he does? Where do the powers come from? If all energies are supposed to exist in a balance, then where does he get the energy to give away such powers? It seems like the power forever fortunate would be something way too valuable to give away. What does he even get out of it? And even more than that, Alice, how exactly do you know all of this about magic? Alice looked at me intently, leaning in a bit before she began to speak. Well, as far as the pinstripe man goes, I just don't know what he is. No one does. There are records of the man in the pinstripe suit dating as far back as the written language itself, ingrained in nearly every culture and society in the world. Ancient Greece, Rome, Egypt, wherever you go in this world, there is some small record of the events that circulate around the man in the pinstripe suit, even going back as far as you can possibly think. Drawings on cave walls. There are curious images of a man drawn in stripes, handing what appears to be fire to the earliest men. There are countless different accounts of people who have encountered the man in the pinstripe suit, but all have different opinions on who or what he is. Some speak of him as the devil bartering away people's souls in exchange for money and power. Others believe he's some sort of otherworldly god. Some speak of him as a genie, granting the wishes of the poor and impoverished. But the truth is, no one really knows. Nothing about the pinstripe man ever seems to be certain. The only thing that we do know for certain is that he is very, very old and extremely powerful. And as for how I know these things, Alice said, after my grandfather received the power forever fortunate and saw the dramatic effect it had on our lives, all the things that we gained from it, he became obsessed with magic and the occult. We began spending portions of our fortune on very rare research materials, books, artifacts. After seeing the power of forever fortunate, my grandfather became convinced that magic was the key, that if we could learn enough about magic, our family's fortunes could never end, that we could become even more powerful. And so, since the days of my great-grandfather, learning about magic has become a key part of the education of all those existing within the Warren Guard household. And as for what he got out of the deal when it came to giving my family the power forever fortunate, Alice said, raising her hand and sticking up 2 fingers. 20%. That is the man in the pinstripe suit's cut. 20% of the luck energy that we drain from others goes directly to the man in the pinstripe suit. What he does with it or how he uses it is something we just don't know. It's not as if all he barters away to people are powers. There are tales of him giving people basically everything: money, influence, status, valuable artifacts or things that are hard to find, knowledge, secrets, even revenge, death to those that have wronged you, or pain and suffering if that's your forte. There are even accounts of him restoring life to the dead. We know that magic is not an infinite resource, that it all has to come from somewhere, and that the greater the task you accomplish, the more magical energy is required to achieve it. This is why there are heavy limitations on magic and how it can be used. For example, I mentioned bringing the dead back to life. It sounds simple enough when you just say it, but in actuality, doing it is an entirely different thing. Most that have ever tried it have only ended up dead themselves, and that's because life is an extremely valuable resource. Someone being alive isn't just one thing, it's everything. A mixture of all of your physical and mental energies, the energy that sustains your life, your mind, the energy that tethers your soul to this plane of existence, even the immense amount of energy that your soul itself produces, are all part of the arrangement. Even those with absolutely absurd amounts of experience and power in the magical arts wouldn't dare attempt it, and yet the man in the pinstripe suit seems to be able to do it as if it were nothing at all. Even with all the knowledge that Wallengard family has spent years, generations gathering, we still don't know anything about him. At least, not for certain. The closest that we can surmise to how his powers work is something like a bank, I suppose you could call it. If you imagine magical power as a resource like money that you can spend to buy things, and the man in the pinstripe suit is a bank, whenever someone needs a loan, money in order to increase the happiness or prosperity of their life, the man in the pinstripe suit is willing to cut a deal with you, to give you a loan, so to speak. But just like a bank, it's not a freebie. Nothing is given without cost, and the cost he extracts for giving you what you ask for is always greater than what he gave you, the interest on the account. If you withdraw $1,000, by the time you get done paying him, you've paid nearly double that, at least. This is the closest guess that the Wallengard family has come up with as to how it is the pinstripe man does what he does, but we still can't be certain about it. Okay, I said, gently starting to scratch at my chin, trying to think it over in my head. So the man in the pinstripe suit is like a magical banker who grants loans, but whenever you take out a loan, there's always interest on the payment, a way it adds up so that it's more profitable for him. And despite my original expectations after hearing that he gave you powers aren't all that he can give you. More and more I learned about the pinstripe man, and the more I learned, the more questions I had. Did all the deals he make work like the deal that he made with the Wallengard family? Or did it depend on what you asked him for? Clearly, in the case of the Wallengard family, the payment that he received is what amounts to sustained interests from a bank, slowly collecting small payments over time. But did all his deals work that way? Did different things require different methods of payment? What about Alice's destiny sight? What did he ask in exchange for that? And if someone were to request something that wasn't magical, something more like money or gold, how does he equate the price for that? There's nothing magical about money or gold, and yet Alice assures me that it is something that he can offer. If so, then what's the value exchange? How do you compare the value of magic to the value of monetary goods? I scratched my head, grit my teeth a little in frustration as the gears turned in my head rapidly. No matter how I thought about it, every answer only gave me more questions. Okay, next question, I said, leaning into Alice, when suddenly I heard a voice beginning to call beyond the tree line. Reginald P. Worthington, where are you, young man? I recognized the voice immediately to be my mother's. She didn't sound pleased, but luckily she didn't sound infuriated either. I began to see her crossing through the trees in the garden section, down towards where we were sitting at the brook. Me and Alice quickly stood up as she approached, trying to look as proper as we could. My mother strided up confidently, with a look of somewhat annoyance on her face. And exactly what are you doing out here, young man? She said, beginning to look towards Alice. Alice quickly bowed her head, smiling. Oh, I'm ever so sorry, Mrs. Worthington, Alice said. It's just there were a group of boys being quite unpleasant to me, and your son simply came to my aid. He was quite valiant. I tried to look proper and stay focused as I slightly glanced over at Alice. The ease at which she was able to come up with lies was just another unsettling feature about her, I thought to myself. Alice raised her head from her slight bow. Afterwards, I was feeling quite down, so your son offered to keep me company while I tried to compose myself a little bit better, Mrs. Worthington. He even saved me from falling down the embankment at the cost of falling himself, but I'm afraid it messed up his suit. I am so very sorry. No gentleman such as your son should ever have to pay the cost of a very fine suit just to save someone. So I'm certain if you tell my mother what happened, that she will be more than happy to reimburse you for the suit if you wish. My mother looked down at us, glancing over to me and the small amounts of dirt and debris that had unfortunately gotten my suit a little dirty. Well, I suppose as long as he was being a gentleman and wasn't doing anything untoward, no punishment will be necessary. Now, come, young regiment. We do have places to be. Oh, and Alice, as to your mother, please give her my regards. It has been ever so long since we received a visit, and I would like to see her again. But for the moment, we must adieu. I've actually received word that Regiment's father will be returning home soon, and I want to make sure things are in order at the household. And of course, ensure that Regiment has been keeping up with his classes. I wouldn't want him to fall behind. Now come, Regiment. You can play with Alice on another day, she said, extending her hand, inviting me to step beside her. I obliged, and we began to make our way back towards the garden party, most likely in order to head towards the carriage in the front section. As we began to walk away, the questions in my head continued to roll. All of the things that I had learned, all of the things that I still didn't know. I looked back at Alice briefly as we continued to walk away, to see her with her regular smile on her face. She raised a single hand and placed a single finger to her face, mouthing the shush sound and the words, "It's a secret," trying to ensure that I didn't discuss what we had been talking about with my mother or anyone else. Unfortunately, for the time being, my questions about the man in the pinstripe suit, magic, and all the things around that were going to have to remain unanswered. And just like that, my farewell to the garden party had finally reached its end.